Elijah Turner boarded Coastal Air Flight 623, glancing down the aisle. The cabin buzzed with the rustle of passengers stuffing bags into overhead bins. At 70, Elijah had silver hair and deep-set eyes, carrying a small canvas bag with a few essentials. He maneuvered past lingering passengers, murmuring, "Excuse me," as he brushed lightly against them, heading toward his seat near the emergency exit, a few rows from the cabin's middle. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Dorothy Vance sat in 19B, watching Elijah over the edge of a local newspaper. She'd noticed him the moment he stepped on board, his calm demeanor catching her attention. At 55, Dorothy had neatly tied blonde hair, her sharp eyes tracking Elijah's every move as he settled into his seat and checked his bag. She couldn't pinpoint why, but something about him unsettled her. Her fingers tapped rhythmically on the armrest, though she hadn't read a word of the paper in front of her. Elijah set his bag on the floor, sat down, and quickly checked that his blood pressure medication and a Medal of Honor, a keepsake from his civil rights days, were still safe. Satisfied, he buckled his seatbelt, pulled a book on civil rights history from his bag, and began reading, his thin hands turning the pages slowly. Dorothy kept watching, her eyes fixed on Elijah. She noticed him check his bag again, his careful movements as if guarding something inside. Why does he keep doing that? She wondered, her brows furrowing. In her mind, fragmented news snippets about aviation security she'd read online surfaced, as if warning her of danger. This elderly man with silver hair suddenly became a big question mark to Dorothy. The cabin hummed with passengers settling in, the shuffle of luggage, and chattering voices. Elijah, unaware of the eyes on him, turned a new page. He adjusted his position, trying to get comfortable in the cramped seat, his eyes focused on lines recounting the Birmingham protests, where he'd once stood against injustice. Dorothy gripped her newspaper, unease rising. She couldn't take it anymore. As Claire Hughes, the lead flight attendant, passed by, Dorothy raised a hand to flag her down. Claire stopped, her professional smile in place. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft. Dorothy lowered her voice, glancing quickly at Elijah. "Do you see that man by the emergency exit?" she whispered, her eyes pointing toward him. "He keeps checking his bag. Do you think it's safe to have someone like him in such an important seat?" Claire followed Dorothy's gaze, seeing Elijah quietly reading. Her smile didn't waver. "I assure you, ma'am, all passengers have been screened. Our seating is arranged per safety regulations," she said evenly. Dorothy pursed her lips, unsatisfied. "I just think, you know, with what you hear on the news these days, it's better to be careful, right?" she pressed, her tone slightly sharp. Claire's smile held, but her eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. "If you have any specific concerns, please let me know. We want all passengers to feel safe and comfortable," she replied, nodding slightly before continuing down the aisle, checking other seats. Dorothy watched Claire go, frustration swelling in her chest. How could she be so dismissive? She turned back to Elijah, seeing him turn another page, his calm demeanor only fueling her suspicion. "He's trying to act harmless," she thought, but she wouldn't be fooled. If no one else would pay attention, she'd keep watch herself. Elijah Turner remained engrossed in his book, his eyes scanning lines about the brutal challenges of the civil rights movement, a part of history he'd lived and breathed. The words reminded him of a time filled with fire and resolve, but he quickly pulled himself back to the present. This was just a flight, a short trip to Portland, where he'd be honored for his lifelong contributions. Elijah only wanted things to go smoothly, without drama or surprises. He craved peace. After all, he was no stranger to storms, and longed only for calm. But peace was the last thing Dorothy Vance felt right now. Sitting in 19B, just a few rows from Elijah, her eyes didn't leave him for a second. The Herald Tribune on her lap was crumpled, its edges bent under her clenched hands. She couldn't shake the growing unease, like a crack spreading in her chest, quiet but certain. She saw Elijah check his bag again, the slow, deliberate motion to Dorothy. That caution itself raised red flags. He's hiding something. She was sure of it. It felt like a ticking clock in her chest. While Elijah just wanted a quiet journey, Dorothy believed she was sitting on the edge of something dangerous, and this time, she couldn't just sit back and let it pass. Elijah, completely unaware of the scrutiny, turned another page. The book on civil rights history recounted the days he'd stood up in Birmingham, and the words seemed to pull him back to the past. He closed his eyes briefly, taking a deep breath to keep his rhythm steady, trying to shake off the fatigue of the long trip. In the bag at his feet, his blood pressure medication and Medal of Honor, mementos of his activism, remained secure, and he felt reassured, knowing they were there. He just wanted this flight to pass peacefully, to reach Portland, and receive his honor without trouble. The cabin had grown quieter, with most passengers settled. The hum of the engines mixed with the rustle of a few still arranging luggage. Dorothy glanced around, looking for a chance to act. When Claire Hughes passed by again, her professional demeanor intact, Dorothy raised her hand, her voice low but urgent. Claire stopped, her polite smile in place. "Yes, ma'am. Is there something else?" she asked, leaning toward Dorothy. Dorothy leaned closer, her whisper tense. "Do you see that man by the emergency exit? He's been checking his bag since he got on. I told you already, but I really think something's off. Don't you?" Claire glanced briefly at Elijah, seeing him reading quietly, like any other passenger. Her smile didn't falter, her voice steady, but firm. "I understand your concern, ma'am, but as I said, all passengers have been screened. His behavior isn't unusual." Dorothy pursed her lips, shaking her head slightly, clearly displeased. "Not unusual? How can you say that? Someone like him, they always seem normal, until something happens. I've seen it on the news, you know. We can't just sit here and do nothing." Her voice rose slightly, though still hushed, but her irritation was clear. Claire maintained her smile, but her eyes sharpened faintly, almost unnoticed. "If you have any specific concerns, please tell me. We have security measures, and I assure you everything is under control. Please relax and enjoy the flight." She nodded slightly, and moved down the aisle, her demeanor calm, as if nothing had happened. Dorothy watched Claire go, frustration surging like a wave. How could she brush it off like that? She turned back to Elijah, seeing him set his book down briefly, to grab a water bottle from his bag. To Dorothy, that action was like pouring fuel on a fire. "He's checking the bag again," she muttered, her eyes narrowing. In her mind, the distorted news stories about aviation security she'd read on social media screamed, warning her of a threat right in front of her. Elijah, oblivious to the stir, took a sip of water and returned the bottle to his bag. He resumed his book, focusing on the lines, trying to immerse himself in the story, to escape the cabin's stuffy air. He sensed a slight tension in the atmosphere, but chalked it up to the usual unease of long flights. He took a deep breath, letting calm return, not wanting anything to disturb his peace. Dorothy, unable to stand it, turned to Edith Crane, the older woman, seated beside her. "Do you see that man by the emergency exit?" she whispered, her voice tight with stress. "He keeps checking his bag. Don't you think that's odd?" Edith looked up from her magazine, surprised by the sudden question. She glanced at Elijah, saw him reading, then turned back to Dorothy. "I don't know," she replied hesitantly. "He looks normal to me. Is something wrong?" Dorothy frowned, irritated by the lack of agreement. "Normal? How can you say that? He keeps rummaging through his bag, like he's hiding something. I told the flight attendant, but they don't care. Are we supposed to wait until something happens?" Her voice carried a hint of anger, though she kept it low to avoid drawing too much attention. Edith glanced at Elijah again, then returned to her magazine. "Maybe, if there's really an issue, the crew will handle it. I don't think it's anything," she said softly, clearly unwilling to get involved. Dorothy clenched her jaw, disappointment surging. How could everyone be so apathetic? She turned back to Elijah, her eyes narrowing, determined not to let him slip from her watch. If no one else would act, she would keep tabs herself. She gripped the armrest, feeling like the only one on this flight aware of the looming danger. Her suspicion had become a smoldering flame, flaring each time she saw him touch the small bag at his feet. Edith Crane's magazine, beside her, remained half open, but Dorothy no longer bothered whispering to her. Edith's indifference, and Claire Hughes's reassurances, only fueled her frustration. She gripped the armrest, feeling like the sole person on this flight, recognizing the threat lurking. Elijah, a few rows ahead, remained absorbed in his book on civil rights history. The lines about his stand in Birmingham, facing injustice and prejudice, seemed to whisper patience to him. He turned a new page, his thin hands moving slowly, unaware of the cold glare fixed on him. In the bag at his feet, his blood pressure medication and Medal of Honor lay secure, and he felt reassured thinking of them. He just wanted this flight to pass peacefully, to reach Portland, and be honored without issues. The cabin was now quiet, with only the engine's hum and faint passenger rustles. Dorothy scanned around, seeing everyone seemingly unconcerned. She stood abruptly, striding down the narrow aisle straight to Elijah's seat by the emergency exit. "Hey you!" she called loudly, her voice ringing out, silencing the cabin momentarily. All eyes turned to her and Elijah. "Open that bag and show everyone. What are you hiding that you keep checking it?" She pointed at the bag at his feet, her eyes blazing. Elijah looked up, startled by the harsh voice. He saw Dorothy, a middle-aged woman with neatly tied blonde hair, standing before him aggressively. He took a deep breath, keeping his voice low and calm. "I'm not hiding anything. It's just my medication and personal items. You should return to your seat." He spoke briefly, his eyes steady, then bent to resume reading. Dorothy shook her head, her voice rising, nearly shouting. "Medication and personal items? Don't lie. I saw you checking that bag since you got on. Do you think I'm stupid? If it's nothing, why not open it for everyone to see?" She turned to the passengers around, trying to rally attention. "Doesn't anyone find this strange? He keeps checking his bag, like he's hiding something dangerous." Claire Hughes, mid-cabin, hurried over upon hearing Dorothy. "Ma'am, return to your seat now," she said, her voice stern but professional. Ryan Walsh, the rookie attendant, trailed awkwardly, unsure what to do. Claire raised a hand, trying to stop Dorothy. "You're disturbing other passengers. We've explained there's no reason to check his bag." Dorothy yanked her arm from Claire, her eyes still on Elijah. "No reason. He's by the emergency exit, and keeps rummaging through his bag. If something happens, will you take responsibility? I just want everyone safe." She turned to Martin Hayes, seated nearby, her voice sharp. "Don't you find it odd? Why's everyone just sitting there?" Martin looked up from his laptop, visibly annoyed. "I told you, I don't see anything wrong." "You're blowing this out of proportion," he replied curtly, returning to his screen, clearly wanting no part of it. Lila Foster, a young passenger a few rows back, couldn't take it anymore. She stood, her voice clear. "She has no proof. He's just reading a book. Why's she harassing him?" Lila pointed at Dorothy, her eyes angry. A few nearby passengers nodded, murmuring agreement, isolating Dorothy further. Elijah glanced around, realizing the entire cabin was watching him. He took a deep breath, keeping his voice steady. "I don't want trouble. If you don't trust me, there's nothing more I can do. I just want peace." He set the book on his lap, his eyes meeting Dorothy's, devoid of anger. Dorothy clenched her jaw, frustration peaking at the lack of support. "Peace? You think I'll let it go when you're acting so suspicious? Open the bag, or I'll make the crew sort this out." She turned to Claire, nearly shouting, "Aren't you going to do anything? He's threatening everyone's safety." Claire stepped forward, standing between Dorothy and Elijah, her voice firmer than ever. "Ma'am, I've made it clear. If you don't return to your seat now, we'll report this to the pilot and handle it per regulations. Please cooperate." She signaled Ryan, who stepped closer, ready to assist if needed. Dorothy took a step back, her eyes still burning. "Fine, but if something happens, don't say I didn't warn you." She reluctantly returned to her seat, but didn't sit immediately, glaring at Elijah, as if he were an enemy. She gripped her hands, feeling isolated and angry, but resolved not to give up. Elijah shook his head slightly, picked up his book, and resumed reading. He felt the passenger's eyes, but chose to ignore them. He recalled facing prejudice in the past, and patience had carried him through. He told himself this would pass if he stayed calm. Claire returned to the rear, whispering to Ryan, "Keep an eye on her. If she causes more trouble, I'll call security when we land." Ryan nodded, his eyes worried, unsure where this was headed. Elijah Turner sat by the emergency exit, his calm gaze now lifting to meet Dorothy Vance, standing before him. The tension in the cabin of Flight 623 felt like a taut string after Dorothy publicly accused him of hiding something dangerous in his bag. The engine's hum seemed drowned by the heavy silence of the passengers, all eyes on the two. Claire Hughes stood between them, her stern voice having just ordered Dorothy back to her seat, while Ryan Walsh hovered awkwardly behind, unsure what to do. Dorothy, eyes blazing, wouldn't back down. "Open that bag. If you're not hiding anything, prove it to everyone. I know you're concealing something." She pointed at the bag at his feet, her voice sharp, drawing more attention from nearby passengers. Elijah took a deep breath, feeling the cabin's eyes on him. He didn't want to escalate, but Dorothy's aggression left him no choice. He set his civil rights history book on his lap, reached for his bag, and unzipped it. "All right," he said, his voice calm but clear. He pulled out a bottle of blood pressure medication, holding it up for Dorothy and others to see, then drew out a metal medal of honor, glinting under the cabin lights. "This is what's in my bag. Medication and this medal. I'm a former civil rights lawyer who worked in Birmingham. I'm headed to Portland for an award. Now, are you satisfied?" The cabin fell silent for a few seconds, then murmurs spread. Lila Foster, the young woman who'd challenged Dorothy, stood again, her eyes bright. "I know him. I heard about him in a lecture at school. He fought against racism in the South." Lila's voice rang clear, prompting nods and whispers from nearby passengers. The news spread quickly, row to row. Dorothy froze, her eyes flickering between the medication and the medal in Elijah's hand. She stepped back, but her mouth stayed firm. You're just putting on a show. Who knows if that medal's real? I don't buy it. You're still suspicious." Her voice was weaker, but she clung to her defiance, as if unwilling to admit she was wrong. Claire Hughes, standing between them, turned to Elijah with an apologetic look. "Sir, I'm so sorry this happened. We didn't expect things to go this far." She turned back to Dorothy, her voice harder. "Ma'am, he's shown you. There's nothing dangerous. Return to your seat now, or we'll report this to the pilot." Martin Hayes, the middle-aged man who dismissed Dorothy's suspicions, looked up from his laptop, annoyed. "She's wrong. He didn't do anything suspicious. I don't know why she's making a scene," he said bluntly, returning to his screen, clearly done with it. Lila stepped closer, her eyes on Elijah with respect. "He's a real hero. She should apologize." She pointed at Dorothy, her voice fierce. A few other passengers nodded, murmuring agreement, their critical eyes turning to Dorothy. Elijah returned the medication and medal to his bag, zipping it shut. He looked at Dorothy, his voice still calm. "I'm used to this kind of thing. I'm not angry, but I hope you'll think twice. Not everyone's a threat, like you assume." He picked up his book, opened it to his page, his demeanor as if the matter was closed. Dorothy glanced around, seeing critical looks from Lila, Martin, and others. "I just wanted safety. Don't you get it?" she muttered, her voice fading, but she refused to apologize. She returned to her seat, sitting reluctantly, glaring at Elijah from afar, as if still rejecting the truth. Claire exhaled. "Sir, I'm truly sorry for this disruption. Thank you for staying calm." She offered a small smile, her eyes sincere. Ryan Walsh, beside her, piped up awkwardly. "I really respect you. I mean, for what you've done." He nodded, his face flushing with embarrassment. Elijah gave a faint smile, nodding back. "Thank you both. I just want this to be over." He bent to his book, turning a new page, trying to reclaim the peace he'd wanted from the start. The cabin gradually returned to normal, though murmurs continued. Lila sat down, whispering to her neighbor about what she knew of Elijah, adding to the growing respect in the air. Martin shook his head, muttering about unnecessary drama. Dorothy, from 19B, gripped her armrest, her eyes still on Elijah, now mixed with a hint of unease beneath her anger. The cabin of Flight 623 settled after the storm. Dorothy Vance caused. Elijah Turner had revealed his identity as a former civil rights lawyer, easing some tension, but Dorothy remained in 19B, glaring at him from afar, her hands gripping the armrest. Her suspicion hadn't faded. Despite the passengers' support for Elijah, the engine's hum regained dominance, mixed with whispers of those still discussing the incident. Claire Hughes stood at the rear, speaking quickly with Ryan Walsh. "Move her to the back, near the galley," she whispered, her voice low but serious. "She's not stopping. I don't want more trouble." Ryan nodded, his eyes worried, but he followed Claire as she approached Dorothy. "Ma'am," Claire said, her voice firm but professional, "please come with us to the rear. We need your cooperation to maintain order on this flight." She blocked the aisle, her eyes fixed on Dorothy, signaling Ryan to be ready. Dorothy looked up, her eyes flashing. "Cooperate? I just wanted everyone safe. You don't see how suspicious he is. I'm not going anywhere." She crossed her arms, staying put, as if daring Claire. Claire took a deep breath, her voice colder. "Ma'am." He showed his bag, medication and a medal. Other passengers confirmed his identity. "If you don't cooperate, we'll report this to the pilot and handle it per regulations upon landing. Please get up now." She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. Dorothy clenched her jaw, glancing around the cabin. Critical looks from Lila Foster, Martin Hayes and others made her feel cornered. "Fine," she muttered, her voice weakening. "But if something happens, don't say I didn't warn you." She stood reluctantly, following Claire and Ryan to the rear, still glaring at Elijah. Elijah, by the emergency exit, picked up his book and resumed reading. He felt the calm return, though Dorothy's gaze still pricked like a needle from afar. He took a deep breath, focusing on the Birmingham civil rights lines, where he'd faced worse prejudices. He told himself patience had carried him through the past, and it would get him through this flight. He didn't hate Dorothy, just felt weary of her stubbornness. Claire led Dorothy to an area near the galley, with fewer passers-by. "Sit here," she said, pointing to an empty seat at the back. "Ryan will stay nearby if you need anything. Please stay quiet until we land." Dorothy sat, her eyes angry but tinged with unease. She looked at Claire, then Ryan, but said nothing more. Ryan stood a few steps away, his eyes nervous. "Will she be okay?" he whispered to Claire as she turned back. Claire nodded slightly. "If she causes more trouble, I'll report it to the pilot immediately. Just watch her." She moved to mid-cabin, checking other passengers, her demeanor calm, but her eyes alert. Elijah turned a new page, relief settling in, as no eyes lingered on him. He recalled Lila's words, the young woman who recognized him from a lecture, and the support from others. It made him smile faintly. Not everyone carried prejudice like Dorothy. He closed his eyes briefly, letting peace return, if only for now. Mid-cabin, Lila Foster whispered to her seatmate, "That's really Elijah Turner. I heard about him. He fought in Birmingham, against injustice. Can't believe I met him here." Her voice brimmed with respect, prompting nods from nearby passengers, who kept murmuring about Elijah's reputation. Martin Hayes, nearby, shook his head slightly. "She really went overboard." "He didn't do anything wrong," he muttered, his eyes back on his laptop. He felt a twinge of shame for staying silent earlier, but just wanted to move on. Claire returned to the rear, checking with Ryan. "How's she doing?" she asked quietly. Ryan glanced at Dorothy, seeing her staring out the window. "She's quiet now, but still looks mad," he replied, his voice uneasy. Claire nodded. "Good. I'll report to the pilot to prep security for landing. She needs to be dealt with." Claire stepped to a corner, grabbing the intercom to contact Captain Edward Brooks. "Captain, we had a disruptive passenger in 19B. It's under control for now, but she hasn't fully stopped. I suggest alerting airport security for landing," she said. her voice concise but clear. Brooks responded over the intercom, his tone steady. Got it. I'll notify them. Keep things stable until we land. Claire stowed the intercom, exhaling, hoping the rest of the flight would stay calm. Coastal Air Flight 623 began its descent, the engine's hum shifting rhythm as it prepared to land in Portland. The cabin, quiet after Dorothy Vance's disruption, held only faint rustles from passengers readying to leave. Claire Hughes stood mid-cabin, checking seatbelts, her eyes cautiously flicking to Dorothy, now seated silently at the back, near the galley under Ryan Walsh's watch. Captain Edward Brooks spoke over the intercom, his voice low and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, we've landed in Portland. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop and the doors are opened. Thank you for flying Coastal Air. The intercom clicked off, but Claire raised a hand, her voice serious. Please stay seated briefly. We need to handle something before deboarding. Dorothy sat at the rear, staring out the window, her hands gripping the armrest, her anger now mixed with unease, but she refused to admit fault. The critical looks from passengers, and Elijah Turner's explanation of his civil rights past, echoed in her mind, making her feel more isolated than ever. She muttered something, but no one caught it. Elijah Turner, near the emergency exit, tucked his civil rights book into his bag. He zipped it up, quickly checking his blood pressure medication and Medal of Honor were safe, then tightened his seatbelt, waiting for the plane to stop. He felt peace returning, though Dorothy's gaze still stung from afar. He took a deep breath, telling himself it was over, and he just wanted to leave the plane without more trouble. The cabin door opened, and 2 airport security officers boarded, their dark blue uniforms crisp, their eyes stern. Claire approached, pointing toward Dorothy. She's at the back, near the galley. She caused trouble throughout the flight, from false accusations to disturbing others, she said briefly, her voice professional. One officer nodded, then walked with his partner toward Dorothy. Ma'am, the officer said, his voice low but firm, please come with us. We need to question you about the incident on this flight. He blocked the aisle, gesturing for Dorothy to stand. Dorothy looked up, her eyes flashing. Question me? I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted everyone safe. He's the suspicious one. She pointed at Elijah, her voice rising, but her defiance was weaker now. The officer shook his head slightly. We've received a report from the crew. Please cooperate, or we'll have to take stricter measures. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on Dorothy. Dorothy clenched her jaw, glancing around but finding no supportive looks. She stood reluctantly, muttering, "Fine, but you'll see I was right." She followed the officers off the plane, glaring at Elijah one last time before disappearing through the door. Claire exhaled, turning to Elijah, who remained seated. "Sir, I'm so sorry about this again. Thank you for staying calm throughout." She gave a small smile, her eyes sincere. Ryan Walsh, beside her, added awkwardly, "Yeah, I really admire you. I mean for what you've done." He nodded, his face flushing. Elijah smiled faintly, nodding back. "Thank you both. I just want this to be done. I'm used to things like this." He stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder, waiting for most passengers to leave to avoid the crowd. Lila Foster, from a few rows back, rushed up before exiting. "Mr. Turner, I admire you so much. Can I share this story in class? I mean about what you did in Birmingham." She looked at Elijah, her eyes bright with respect. Elijah nodded, smiling warmly. "Go ahead and share it. I hope young people like you keep learning about justice." He patted Lila's shoulder lightly, then turned to wait for the aisle to clear. The cabin emptied, with only a few passengers lingering. Claire and Ryan stood at the door, bidding farewell to everyone, their eyes still carrying a hint of tension from the ordeal. Elijah Turner stepped off flight 623, the cool Portland airport air filling his lungs. He carried his small canvas bag over his shoulder, holding his blood pressure medication and Medal of Honor, the items that had sparked the tension. The cabin was now empty, with only Claire Hughes and Ryan Walsh at the door, saying goodbye to the last passengers. Elijah nodded lightly to them, his eyes grateful, then walked down the jetway, leaving the flight's chaos behind. Claire watched Elijah go, smiling faintly. "He's truly remarkable," she whispered to Ryan as he faded from view. Ryan nodded, still a bit awkward. "I didn't expect to meet someone like him. She really messed up big time." They returned to their duties, their eyes carrying a touch of relief that it was over. Elijah reached the baggage claim, the airport bustling with passenger chatter and intercom announcements. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket, dialing his granddaughter. "Hey, I just landed in Portland," he said, his voice warm. "The flight was a bit noisy. Someone thought I was a threat. But it's fine. Everything's sorted." He smiled at his granddaughter's laugh over the phone. "I still believe society can change, as long as there are young people like you." He hung up, his eyes brightening with hope, then headed outside toward his hotel to prepare for the ceremony. In a small airport room, Dorothy Vance sat across from two security officers, her eyes angry, but now tinged with fatigue. Before her was a warning notice from Coastal Air, requiring her to attend a cultural diversity course to avoid a flight ban. "Ma'am," an officer said, his voice low, "you caused a disturbance with baseless accusations. We've verified with the crew and passengers. Mr. Turner wasn't a threat. Please sign here to acknowledge." Dorothy clenched her jaw, her hand trembling as she took the pen. "I just wanted safety," she muttered, her voice fading. "Don't you get it? I saw it on the news." She trailed off, her eyes wavering as she recalled Elijah's words and the passenger's criticism. She signed the paper, but inside, she wrestled. Her suspicion ran deep, but Lila's look, Elijah's words, and Martin's silence echoed, making her question herself, if only slightly. Outside the airport, Lila Foster walked out with other passengers, still whispering to her companion about Elijah. "I'm telling this story in class. He's living proof of justice," she said, her voice full of respect. Martin Hayes, pulling his suitcase behind, shook his head lightly. "She really overdid it. I should learn more about the civil rights movement after this," he muttered, his eyes carrying a hint of regret for staying silent earlier. The story of Elijah and Dorothy spread through the crowd, a small lesson on prejudice and dignity. Elijah sat in a taxi, looking out the window as it rolled through Portland streets. He recalled the flight, Dorothy's suspicious eyes, Lila's support, and his own patience. He smiled faintly, thinking of Birmingham's days, where he'd faced harsher prejudice. Society's changed, if not completely, he told himself, his eyes brightening at the thought of young people like Lila. He believed they'd carry on the path he and others had forged. At the hotel, Elijah stood before a large auditorium, ready for the ceremony. He wore a simple suit, his Medal of Honor pinned to his chest, the stage lights glinting off his silver hair. Stepping to the podium, he looked at the crowd, young faces, curious eyes. "Justice doesn't come easily," he said, his warm voice filling the room. "But with patience and faith, we can change things. I saw that today, and I hope you will too." Applause erupted, and Elijah smiled, feeling hope for a better future. The story "Racist White Woman" humiliates a black old man on the plane, and then his true identity is revealed. I've Rewritten reflects the lingering racial tensions in American society today, while highlighting the power of dignity and patience against prejudice. Set on Flight 623 from Birmingham to Portland, Dorothy Vance represents some Americans swayed by misinformation on social media, like when she suspected Elijah Turner, just for checking his bag, a normal act she blew into a threat. This mirrors reality in the U.S., where racial biases are often fueled by inaccurate information, especially in public spaces like airports or planes, where diverse passengers can spark misunderstandings. Elijah Turner, a 70-year-old former civil rights lawyer, showed remarkable calm when Dorothy publicly accused him. He didn't lash out, but opened his bag, revealing his Medal of Honor and identity, clarifying the truth, and prompting passengers like Lila Foster to defend him. This echoes historical figures like Martin Luther King Jr., who used patience to face injustice, and reflects a key lesson in today's America, where racial debates persist. Maintaining personal dignity can shift others' perceptions. Lila's support, as a younger generation, shows hope that education and openness are slowly replacing prejudice, as when she recognized Elijah from a school lecture. The takeaway is, instead of meeting hostility with conflict, use truth and character to prove your worth, as Elijah did. In real-life America, when facing prejudice, like Dorothy suspecting Elijah for being black, stay patient, share your story, and trust that people like Lila will listen. At the same time, society needs education to prevent misunderstandings like Dorothy's, encouraging people to verify information before judging, building a more inclusive community. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for meaningful stories, like Elijah Turner's journey. Thank you for watching and supporting truth over prejudice. See you in the next video.